When it comes to winter riding, there are several different variables that work together to wreak havoc towards your winter riding escapades. Namely, a mix of all this stuff on the ground and the material that they use to try and make sure that this stuff melts away.
Now, that's not to be taken as me alluding to the fact that riding around in the winter is a little bit more treacherous due to the extra cold, slippery, and otherwise somewhat dangerous conditions. There's a healthy amount of videos out there to give you tips on how to deal with winter riding. My advice, try racing cyclocross. No, today, being Tuesday, is a Tinker Tuesday episode on how to get a bike ready for the havoc that this upcoming high school chemistry refresher will explain to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you there. Yes, iron. A very useful element inside of the periodic table. It's found in a lot of different places, mixed with a lot of other elements to create very useful materials. Likely, you've seen iron used in places that you're very familiar with. Perhaps automobiles or bicycles. However, iron does have one very unredeeming quality, and that is its very, very unsavory attraction towards oxygen. Some of you may have heard this as oxidization, or in other words, rust. Rust occurs when iron and oxygen mix together to create iron oxide. Now, this can happen in a number of ways. Naturally occurring oxygen in the air will slowly but surely begin to oxidize iron. These two elements enjoy being with one another, as one electron they would very much like to give away, and the other has an electron that it would very much like to receive. Don't get too excited now. It can be accelerated by adding water to give the iron more oxygen to pull away from hydrogen. This reaction of the iron and the oxygen getting together from the water releases a hydrogen from its bond with oxygen, also creating a mild acid, which also eats away at the iron. More added accelerator comes in the form of salt that is placed on the roads, which is done by cities in an effort to lower the freezing temperature of ice, and it comes in as two separated ions, which accelerates the iron oxide process once again. Appropriate steps must be taken in an effort to protect these raw iron and raw metals from this reaction from occurring, to allow for the longevity of the piece that the material is made of. Thank you.
Now if that's not totally clear, and maybe it doesn't make sense, you'd have to blame that professor. I don't know. He dropped out of university. And if you do want to know more about chemistry, definitely go check out the service that is absolutely not sponsoring this channel at all. I believe it's called Skillshare. Essentially what we're getting into here today is kind of what I did to Brent's bike a long time ago when I was still working at the shop. Just kind of taking the precautions that you should do to make sure that I get longevity out of this frame and fork. Everything else, I'm like a little less concerned about. And there's a reason for that, but I think we'll kind of get into that maybe near the end. Essentially what I want to do right now is make sure that this frame and fork is protected from that pesky oxidization that video was just talking about. And it all kind of starts with some sort of rust corrosion protectant will work. Rust check is not the be-all end-all. It just so happens to be what I have. Thankfully, as you can see, it is for 10-speed bikes, so we're in the clear. Now, the goal here is pretty darn simple. What you want to do is just get at all of the spots where the frame is going to be bare and exposed. And looking at it here, you can obviously tell that that all happens to be on the inside of the bike. Now, it's not really a spot where a lot of water or a lot of anything really gets into, but you still want to take your precaution where you can to try and make sure that any sort of exposed, non-painted, and non-treated tube gets some sort of coating from some sort of rust inhibitor. And that, at the end of the day, is really what I'm trying to achieve here. Make sure that the things that you really don't want to have to replace stay in good shape for long enough that you can just keep using them over and over again. Taking this wheel off is seriously so much of a hassle. Kind of don't want to pull the stem and bars and fork out, but it's really going to be the only access I have to get to the down tube, so kind of a necessary. It's definitely faster than pulling the cranks and bottom bracket out. Alright, so at this point, without doing a whole lot of cleaning, mostly because I just don't want to, I want to grab a rag, which I don't have right now, so that, like, you know, the stuff that you're spraying everywhere doesn't just end up all over your wood floor, and it's like flammable, so you want to be somewhat careful of that. And just get your hose into all the holes that are drilled out in like the head tube and the seat tube and everything that were kind of put in there as an area for heat and smoke to get out when the frame was built. That gives you a spot to actually get some of this rust check treatment in there. There's really not much more to it than that. There's all kinds of cool spots that you can actually get in to get the rust check in there. You know, you'll see the drilled holes just about everywhere. Typically at the end of tubes, especially in this area. Same with the fork. When you got them upside down like I do right now, it's a nice way to get all of it up in there. Now I know it might seem like, you know, why bother for like a winter bike? But if you've got a winter bike that you kind of care about, taking it apart to do this stuff is really important. I didn't really know that this much rust was on the steer tube of this, and you know, it wasn't terrible, but it was starting to kind of like flake and get big. Like, you know, when you can run your hand across it, it's rough, and you know that just pieces are going to fall off of it. I mean, spraying this rust check on it has kind of like beat that down a little bit now, and obviously we've saved it in time, but this is a really good indicator of why you need to take something apart that you've been riding in like really gross conditions for a long time to just inspect it and do something like this, just to like try and keep it going a little bit longer and keep it from being a surprise when something bad happens much later on. And keep in mind, I've only been commuting on this thing for like 4 months. Is it 4 months now? Maybe? I mean, it's lived in a shed for a long time with no protection on it and no heat or whatever, but you know, that's quick. That's quick how things get gross. So in the meantime, I'm just gonna kind of like throw this fork back on with some new grease on the lower race, and just be mindful of the fact that, you know, the steer tube did have some rust on it, and that it should maybe be looked at every so often, just to make sure it doesn't, you know, break in half on me. Now, do you see right here where a little bit of rust is coming out from where the brake post is? That's another one of those spots where there's untreated steel that is just getting eaten to death by salt as you ride through it. Now that's pretty much the workflow for dealing with any sort of like rust and corrosion issues. That is every at-risk bare metal surface that has been treated in one way or another to help fight against any sort of corrosion or rust that wants to happen. The more time you can get out of something, the better, except for one thing that I know a few of you and I have like a bit of a disagreement on, and that is this chain that everyone just absolutely loves to point out how rusty and disgusting it is. But come on, it's a single speed bike, it doesn't need to be good. That chain, I'm pretty sure I found that chain in like the old parts bin of things that needed to be thrown away at the bike shop when it closed. It's probably like a $6 chain. It doesn't need to be clean. Chains aren't expensive. Anyway, single speed chains are very cheap, so I don't spend any time bothering or worrying about giving them baths all the time. But to appease the crowd, I'll clean this one and see what it looks like. You know, it's impressive that like someone would actually take the time to like clean a chain to even just this point, but I can't help but feel like my time is just worth more. Anyway, this is as good as I'm willing to get this. And I did it for you. I did it for you in the comments who hate how dirty and gross my chains are. But I will never be one of those people who comes home after every ride and just scrubs and cleans and just gets chains to look immaculate all the time. I'm not that guy. But what I will say is that this time of year I do switch to a wet condition lube just so that it will stay on the chain for longer and act as an oil to make sure that it doesn't rust more than it was. Other than that, the drivetrain on this is going to perform exactly the same. And besides having actually watched the video a few weeks ago of the fenders that went on this, why I decided to go with them, and of course the reason that they're so great is that they protect your feet and the rest of your body from getting wet. But there's an added benefit to having fenders on your bike for the winter, and that is that they protect everything on the bike from water and salt being flung up into it. So we've got a protective barrier on the inside where all the bare metal is, and we've got fenders on the outside to also alleviate any of the water getting into where it's not supposed to be. Besides all that, in my eyes, there's really not much more to prepping a bike for the winter. Soon, in an upcoming Tinker Tuesday, this bike will get gears, but that's not winter prep at all. That's just me being greedy. If you plan on trying to do the same to your bike, good luck. It's not that difficult.